George had always loved hiking. The dense forests of the Pacific Northwest were his sanctuary, a place to escape the stresses of city life. But on a crisp October morning, George's passion for the woods led into a path from which he might never return. It started as a routine hike. George packed his essentials, including a map, compass, and enough food and water for a day trip. He chose a trail he had never explored before, intrigued by its remoteness and the promise of solitude. The path wound through towering pines and moss-covered rocks, the forest alive with the rustling of leaves and distant bird calls. As the day wore on, George felt a sense of unease. The trail markers, once frequent and clear, became sparse and harder to find. He checked his map repeatedly, but the dense canopy above made it difficult to get his bearings. Determined to press on, he convinced himself he would find his way back. By late afternoon, the forest had grown eerily quiet. George's water supply was running low, and he realized with a sinking feeling that he was lost. He decided to turn back, retracing his steps, but the path seemed unfamiliar, and the trees loomed larger and more menacing. As dusk fell, George stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. It was dilapidated, with broken windows and a door hanging off its hinges. He hesitated, the logical part of his mind warning him to keep moving, but the cabin offered a chance to rest and regroup. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. He found a rickety chair and sank into it, exhaustion washing over him. Night descended quickly. The darkness outside was impenetrable, and the forest sounds had been replaced by an unsettling silence. George tried to sleep, but every creak of the old cabin and every whisper of wind sent shivers down his spine. He felt a growing sense of being watched, though he saw nothing but shadows. In the middle of the night, a noise jolted him awake. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate, they crunched on the forest floor outside the cabin. George's heart pounded in his chest as he strained to listen. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. He held his breath, the silence stretching on, oppressive and terrifying. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time had lost all meaning. Then, without warning, the door creaked open. George froze, too terrified to move. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. It was tall, with broad shoulders, and it didn't move. "Who's there?" George's voice was barely a whisper, his throat dry with fear. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under his weight. George's mind raced. He had no weapon, no means of defense. The figure moved closer, and George could make out its features. It was a man, his face obscured by a hood. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "This place is not safe." George's fear turned to confusion. "I'm lost. I just need to find my way back to the trail." The man shook his head. "There's no going back. Not tonight." Before George could respond, the man turned and left the cabin, disappearing into the darkness. George sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had happened. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night, every noise and shadow keeping him on edge. At dawn, George ventured outside, hoping the light would bring clarity, but the forest seemed even more alien and forbidding in the early morning mist. He searched for any sign of the man from the night before, but found none. No footprints, no trail, nothing to suggest he had ever been there. George decided to keep moving, hoping to find a way out of the woods. Hours turned into a day, and then another. His supplies ran out, and desperation set in. He stumbled upon a stream and drank greedily, but the water did little to quell his growing panic. On the third day, George's strength waned. He was weak, dehydrated, and disoriented. Just when he thought he couldn't go on, he heard voices. Hope surged within him as he followed the sound, stumbling into a group of hikers who immediately recognized his distress. They escorted him back to civilization, where George recounted his harrowing experience. Search parties were sent out, but no trace of the cabin or the mysterious man was ever found. The forest, it seemed, had swallowed them whole. George never returned to the woods. The memory of those nights haunted him, a reminder of the thin line between the known and the unknown, and the terror that lies in between. George tried to return to his normal life, but the experience had left a deep scar. He often woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the image of the hooded man haunting his dreams. His friends and family encouraged him to see a therapist, but George refused. He was convinced that talking about it would only make the memories more vivid. Weeks turned into months, and George began to feel a strange pull toward the forest. He couldn't explain it, but something inside him needed closure. He started researching the area where he had gotten lost, looking for any historical records or local legends that might explain what had happened. He found stories of people going missing in those woods, whispers of a ghostly figure seen by campers, but nothing concrete. One evening, George received a package in the mail. There was no return address, just his name scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was an old leather-bound journal. He opened it cautiously, his hands trembling. The first entry was dated over 50 years ago, written by a man named Thomas Everett. Thomas had been a park ranger in the area and had documented strange occurrences in the woods. Unexplainable noises, sightings of a hooded figure, and people disappearing without a trace. George's heart raced as he read entry after entry, the accounts eerily similar to his own experience. The last entry caught his attention. Thomas wrote about finding an abandoned cabin and encountering a man who warned him to leave. The description of the man matched George's memory exactly. The final lines of the journal sent chills down George's spine. He said the forest has rules. Those who enter uninvited and unprepared pay the price. I fear I am next. George knew he had to go back. He had to find the cabin, uncover the truth. Armed with better supplies and a renewed determination, he returned to the trailhead. This time, he was prepared. He marked his path carefully, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs to ensure he could find his way back. Days passed as George navigated the dense forest. Just when he was about to give up hope, he found it, the cabin. It looked exactly as he remembered, a decaying relic of a time long past. He hesitated at the doorway, memories of that terrifying night flooding back. Inside, the cabin was as he had left it, dusty, silent, and foreboding. George searched for any clues, anything that might explain what had happened. In a corner, hidden under a loose floorboard, he found another journal. This one was older, its pages brittle with age. The entries were written in a shaky hand, detailing the experiences of others who had encountered the hooded man. Each story ended the same way, with a warning and a disappearance. George felt a cold dread settle over him. He was not the first, and he wouldn't be the last. As he prepared to leave, George heard footsteps outside. His heart pounded as he turned to face the door. The hooded man stood there, his presence as imposing as before. "You came back," the man said, his voice a mixture of surprise and resignation. "I need answers," George replied, his voice steady despite his fear. "Who are you? What is this place?" The man sighed, pulling back his hood to reveal a weather-tired face. "I am a guardian of sorts. This forest is ancient, with its own rules and protections. Those who come here uninvited are tested. Some, like you, are allowed to leave. Others what?" George pressed. "They become part of the forest," the man said simply. "I was once like you, lost and searching for answers. Now I am bound to this place." George felt a surge of anger. "I don't accept that. There must be a way to break this cycle." The man shook his head sadly. "There isn't. Leave now while you still can." George refused to accept defeat. He spent the next few days in the forest, searching for anything that might break the curse. He found old totems, strange symbols carved into trees, but nothing that offered a solution. The forest seemed to close in on him, its dark secrets impenetrable. In the end, George realized the truth. Some mysteries were not meant to be solved. The forest was a place of power, and its guardians were bound to it for eternity. He left the woods for the final time, carrying the weight of his knowledge with him. George never spoke of his second journey. He lived the rest of his life haunted by what he had learned, the eerie silence of the forest always echoing in the back of his mind. The woods remained a place of secrets, its dark allure a testament to the thin line between the known and the unknown, and the terror that lies in between. Sam had always been an avid hiker, finding solace in the tranquility of the woods. This weekend, he decided to explore a new trail deep in the heart of the national forest. It was a place few dared to venture, rumored to be a labyrinthine network of paths, where even experienced hikers could get lost. Sam, undeterred by the tales, packed his gear and set off early Saturday morning. The day was perfect, clear skies, a gentle breeze, and the fresh scent of pine in the air. Sam felt invigorated as he followed the trail deeper into the forest. Hours passed as he navigated through dense underbrush and towering trees. He stopped for lunch by a crystal-clear stream, enjoying the solitude and the sounds of nature. As the afternoon wore on, Sam noticed that the trail markers became sparse. He pressed on, confident in his navigation skills. But soon he realized he had taken a wrong turn. The familiar path had given way to an overgrown thicket, and the sun was beginning to set. Sam pulled out his map and compass, attempting to reorient himself, but nothing seemed to match up. He walked in what he believed was the right direction, only to find himself deeper in the unfamiliar woods. Panic started to creep in as dusk settled, the shadows growing longer and the forest darker. He tried calling out for help, but his voice was swallowed by the vast, empty wilderness. Nightfall came swiftly, bringing with it an eerie silence. Sam's flashlight flickered as he stumbled through the underbrush, each sound amplified in the oppressive darkness. His mind played tricks on him. Every rustle of leaves seemed to be something lurking just out of sight. After what felt like hours, Sam stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin. Relief washed over him as he approached the structure, hoping to find shelter and perhaps some clues to his location. The cabin door creaked open, revealing a dusty, abandoned interior. He found a rusty lantern and managed to light it, casting a dim glow around the room. As he settled in for the night, Sam couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He dismissed it as paranoia brought on by exhaustion and fear. Lying on the creaky floor, he finally succumbed to a fitful sleep. He awoke to the sound of footsteps outside the cabin. Heart pounding, Sam held his breath, listening intently. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, crunching on the fallen leaves. He peeked through a crack in the wall, but the darkness outside revealed nothing. Summoning his courage, Sam opened the door and called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Silence. He stepped outside, the lantern casting long shadows in the forest. The footsteps had stopped, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. He spent the next day trying to find his way back to the main trail, but every path he took seemed to lead him in circles. The forest seemed to change around him, familiar landmarks disappearing and new ones appearing. His supplies dwindled, and his hope waned. On the third night, Sam heard voices, faint, indistinct whispers that seemed to come from all around him. They spoke his name, urging him deeper into the woods. Desperation overcame him, and he followed the voices, hoping they would lead him to safety. But the further he went, the more the forest closed in on him, the trees seeming to reach out with gnarled branches. He stumbled upon a clearing with a large stone in the center, covered in strange carvings. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, but there was no one in sight. Exhausted and delirious, Sam collapsed by the stone, the whispers now a deafening chorus in his mind. As dawn broke, search parties finally found the clearing. They discovered Sam lying unconscious by the stone, his face pale and gaunt. He was rescued, but the experience had left him changed. He never spoke of what happened in the woods, the whispers that haunted his dreams, or the feeling of eyes watching him from the shadows. Sam never ventured into the forest again, but the memory of those dark, twisted paths and the voices that called to him lingered, a constant reminder of the terror he endured in the woods. After his rescue, Sam tried to return to a normal life, but the memories of those harrowing nights in the woods clung to him like a shadow. He moved back to his hometown, hoping that familiar surroundings would help him heal. Yet every night as he lay in bed, he could still hear the faint whispers echoing in his mind. Months passed, and Sam found himself drawn to researching the area where he had gotten lost. He learned that the forest had a dark history, filled with stories of other hikers who had vanished without a trace. Some claimed the woods were cursed, while others spoke of an ancient presence that dwelled within the trees, watching and waiting for those who dared to wander too far. One evening, Sam received an unexpected visit from an elderly woman named Martha, who introduced herself as a local historian. She had heard about his ordeal and wanted to share some information that might help him understand what he had experienced. Martha spoke of an old legend passed down through generations, a legend of a stone circle deep within the forest, said to be a portal to another realm. Intrigued and desperate for answers, Sam agreed to meet with Martha again. She brought him old maps and faded photographs of the stone circle, showing symbols that matched the carvings he had seen. Martha had explained that the stone circle was believed to be a place of great power, used by ancient tribes for rituals to communicate with the spirits of the forest. Despite his fear, Sam felt compelled to return to the woods. He needed closure, a way to confront the darkness that had haunted him. Equipped with the knowledge Martha had provided, he set out once more, determined to find the stone circle and understand what had happened to him. The journey back into the forest was both familiar and terrifying. As he approached the area where he had been found, the air grew colder and the whispers returned, more insistent than ever. Guided by the old maps, Sam eventually located the stone circle, now overgrown and hidden by thick underbrush. As he stood before the stones, the whispers became a roar, filling his head with incomprehensible voices. Sam knelt by the largest stone and placed his hand on the carvings. To his astonishment, the symbols began to glow, emitting a soft, ethereal light. The ground beneath him trembled, and he felt a pull, as if the stones were drawing him into another world. Suddenly, the forest around him seemed to fade, replaced by a surreal landscape of shadows and mist. Sam found himself standing in a dark, twisted version of the forest, where the trees loomed like specters, and the air was thick with an unnatural chill. In the distance, he saw figures moving among the trees, pale, ghostly forms that watched him with hollow eyes. Fear threatened to overwhelm him, but Sam forced himself to move forward. He approached one of the figures, a gaunt, spectral woman with eyes that seemed to pierce his soul. She spoke in a voice that resonated in his mind, a blend of sorrow and mourning. "You have crossed into the realm of the lost," she said. "Few return from here unchanged, but you seek answers, and the forest has chosen to show you." The woman led Sam to a clearing where he saw scenes from his ordeal play out as if on a ghostly stage. He saw himself lost and desperate, guided by the whispers to the stone circle. He saw the faces of those who had vanished, their spirits trapped in this twilight realm, forever wandering the paths between worlds. "You must break the cycle," the woman whispered. "The forest feeds on fear and despair. Only by facing the darkness within can you find your way back." With newfound resolve, Sam confronted the shadows that had haunted him. He acknowledged his fear, his guilt, and his helplessness. As he did, the spectral figures began to fade, and the forest around him brightened. The stone circle's glow intensified, and Sam felt himself being pulled back to the world he knew. He awoke on the forest floor, the morning sun filtering through the trees. The stone circle was silent, the carvings now just ancient markings on weathered rock. Sam stood up, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in months. The whispers were gone, and the forest felt like just a forest again. As he made his way back to civilization, Sam realized that the experience had changed him. He had faced the darkness within and emerged stronger. He knew the woods held secrets that would never be fully understood, but he also knew that he had reclaimed his life from the grip of fear. Sam never forgot the lessons of the forest, but he no longer feared it. He returned to his hiking, always respectful of the wild places, knowing that some paths were best left unexplored. And in the quiet moments when the wind whispered through the trees, he would remember the voices that had guided him and the courage it took to find his way home.